You know, I've been around for a while. Met some interesting people. Done some crazy things. So you just might think that there's not much that can take me by surprise. You'd be wrong. The world is full of stories, science and things that amaze and confound me. Every single day, incredible mysteries that keep me awake at night. Some I can answer. Others just defy logic.
Is the history of the world wrong? In a Mexican cave, a young girl finds a bizarre 900-year-old skeleton. Is it evidence aliens once walked our planet?
This is the equivalent of landing on the moon.
A Peruvian doctor discovers stone carvings that could rewrite the history of evolution. Did dinosaurs live alongside humans?
This is one of archaeology's most baffling enigmas.
And a 2,000-year-old wooden model reveals an incredible secret. Did the ancient Egyptians invent the airplane?
This is going to throw the way we view ancient civilizations completely topsy-turvy.
Yeah. It's a weird world, and I love it. I love books. They make me think, especially anything about history. Thousands of years of human development and achievement. They're all contained in the pages of these wonderful documents that not only teach generation after generation about where we came from, but where we might be going. And you've ever stopped to consider what it might mean for us if all we've learned and all we think we've learned about our past is wrong? It's unthinkable, isn't it? Well, guess what? There's real and bizarre events out there that are telling us we may need to rethink everything we know about everything. The unthinkable is here.
Researcher Lloyd Pye is the guardian of what he contends is the most important artifact ever discovered. The story begins in the Mexican countryside over 80 years ago.
It was originally discovered in about 1930 by a young girl about 100 miles southwest of Chihuahua. She was visiting relatives there. She went out exploring the area, found a mine tunnel, went in, and inside the tunnel found two skeletons.
Examining the bones, the girl thinks one of the skulls looks very strange.
It was a misformed or misshapen skull. She believed it was a deformity.
With no idea what she stumbled across, the girl removes the skull as a macabre souvenir. She holds onto it for 60 years.
She brought it to her home in El Paso, kept it for her whole life. When she found out that she was dying in the early 90s, she asked some friends if they would take it for her.
The skull ends up in the care of Melanie Young, a medical professional who immediately makes a shocking discovery.
She had seen a lot of deformity, and she said right away, I don't think this is necessarily a deformed human skull. And that's how I got involved.
Perplexed, Melanie approaches Lloyd. He's an expert in human skulls. But in his years of studying human development, he's never seen anything like it.
When I looked into those eyes, it was like, whoa, this really is something unusual. It's so unusual, it's so bizarre. A moron can see this is not really a human skull. It's something else, but what? But by the same token, I was like everybody else. My first reaction was it has to be some kind of deformity, because if it's not, then this is the equivalent of the shepherd that found the Dead Sea Scrolls. I mean, this is a big deal, and I didn't believe that that kind of thing would just fall into my lap. I took it to experts in every field of human physiology. The eye guy, the brain guy, the ear guy, the skull shape guy. During the course of '99, I came to understand that physiologically, it was really nothing like a human. It is human-like, but it is definitely non-human. No other way to say it.
But if it's not human, what was it? Lloyd broadens his search.
I took it to experts in UFOs and aliens and have people who had been in it for years evaluate it.
After close examination, the UFO experts reach a stunning conclusion.
The skull is an alien that died on Earth and was buried on Earth 900 years ago. The consensus was, it looks like the skull of a gray alien. The alien that we all know, the one with the heart-shaped face on a thin little neck and the weird eyes, we all know that look, a gray alien.
With this in mind, Lloyd and his supporters name the artifact the Starchild Skull. They keep looking for answers.
How it got here, I don't know. Was it crash landed? I don't know. Did it come here on a visit and get sick and die? I don't know. The implications are as big as you can imagine. The Starchild is going to change history. It's going to prove that at least once an alien being walked on the Earth.
Dear friends, we are gathered here today to pay our last tributes and respects to the memory of our departed and beloved alien child. Oh, sorry, would you excuse me for a moment? Now, this story is definitely weird, or what? Does the Starchild Skull belong to an alien child who was visiting or even conceived on Earth but tragically died? If so, does this change the course of history? But even more importantly, what about the parents? Did anyone think of letting them know? Did they give their child a proper farewell? I doubt it. I'm so sorry. Was a wonderful child who loved comics, sports, and practical jokes like destroying planets with his father's death ray. He'll be sadly missed. Would anyone like to say a few words?
Is the Starchild Skull the most important archaeological discovery ever made? Not everyone thinks so. Yale University neurology professor Stephen Novella has studied the Starchild Skull and claims its appearance is nothing unusual.
Going through medical school and training as a neurologist, I've seen many examples of similar kinds of deformities before. There are lots of genetic anomalies that produce abnormalities or deformities.
Novella's research has led him to believe the Starchild Skull belonged to a human suffering from a medical condition called hydrocephalus.
Hydrocephalus is a term that literally means water on the brain. And what happens is that the fluid that's normally inside and around the brain does not flow like it normally should, and that causes the water and the pressure to build up inside the brain and inside the skull. In young children where the bones of the skull have not yet fused, this can cause the skull to balloon out, sometimes even to incredible size. In an adult where all the bones of the skull have completely fused together, then the hydrocephalus would just cause increased pressure on the brain, but not an expansion of the skull itself.
For Novella, it's this ballooning that explains the Starchild Skull's unusual appearance.
The overall size and shape of the skull and the arrangement of the deformities matches pictures of children and skulls of people with hydrocephalus. Certainly, I've seen pictures of many of them which look very similar to the Starchild skulls.
Sadly, there would have been no treatment for this painful condition in the era from which the Starchild Skull belongs.
The modern treatment for hydrocephalus is to drain the fluid out from inside the brain. It reverses all of the abnormal effects of the hydrocephalus. This is a modern neurosurgical treatment, however. This would not have been available prior to 50 or 60 years ago, let alone hundreds of years ago.
So does this mean that we've yet to play host to intergalactic visitors?
I have nothing against the notion that there are aliens in the universe. I think it would be really cool. I just don't think this skull is it. This is not the evidence of anything alien. Lloyd Pye would have you believe that this one skull, this one bit of evidence, which really has been very imperfectly examined, is enough to rewrite everything that we know. Of course, he's been making that claim for years. Everything you think you know is wrong. That's sort of his shtick, alternative science, alternative history. He wants to brush aside hundreds of years of evidence and expertise. He thinks all scientists are closed-minded and wrong, and therefore he can come up with any fantasy he likes and present that as the truth, because he can just ignore all of established science.
So is this the end of the mystery? Did the Starchild Skull belong to a human suffering from hydrocephalus? Trenton Holliday and John Verano are professors of anthropology at the University of Tulane. They have a different take.
Originally, when I saw the skull, I suspected it might have suffered from hydrocephaly. However, I've since revised my opinion on that. I don't think it was a hydrocephalus individual.
So if not an alien and not hydrocephalic, just who was the Starchild?
The most unusual feature of the Starchild skull is just the shape of the skull. It's flattened in the back, it's bulged at the sides, and I can explain that very easily by cradle boarding.
Cradle boarding was an early solution to a problem many of us face today, making kids portable.
Cradle boarding was a very common practice in South America. It was originally done as a means of restraining the infants so that they could be brought out into the fields. It also was done for aesthetic reasons.
But how could a simple baby-carrying device create the bizarre shape of the Starchild skull?
Here's an example of an actual cradle board from Peru. I've strapped on a doll just to give you an idea of the way an infant would be put on it. And then here you can see how the head is strapped down. The strap goes over the forehead and goes over the back of the skull, holds the child's head in place, allows it to move probably from side to side, and in fact, many of these are asymmetrical, which suggests that they were lying habitually to one side or another.
But cradle boarding had a side effect. As the skull was compressed in one direction, it grew in the other to make room for the baby's rapidly developing brain.
This is a child skull that was cradle boarded. It's bulging out on the two sides, and that's because there's pressure that was put on the back side of the skull. What you can see is the way the skull is flattened in the back and this kind of bulging up from the side, giving it this unusual shape that if you didn't know about cradle boarding, you might think, boy, that's a bizarre looking human skull.
Were the strange features of the Starchild skull caused by an ancient child-carrying device? Or is the truth way more bizarre?
The Starchild had an alien father and an alien mother.
The features of a 900-year-old skull puzzle the scientific community. Some offer practical explanations, such as cradle boarding. Others disagree.
When a skull is cradle boarded, a baby's bones are so soft that they flatten. So if you feel this, it's very flat, as flat as the board that it was pressed to. The Starchild has its natural convolutions to it. So what that means is it was not flattened artificially, it grew this way. Its genes told it to grow. Now, another interesting difference is that a normal human, the crown of the head is round, all the way round. Here, rounded, rounded. If you look at the Starchild, you see clearly that there is a crease here down the middle, a crease. And that could only occur if the suture, this suture line right here, had been fused in a human, was fused early, and then you could have a shape like this where the brain would grow out and around, and that wouldn't really spread out because the suture line would be prematurely fused. But we CAT scanned the Starchild and all of its sutures are open. There's no premature fusing. It's very normal. And also, it's very symmetrical. If you look at the whole skull, it's extraordinarily symmetrical. For as strange as it looks, it's more symmetrical than the human skull. It's more symmetrical than my skull or any average person's skull. In fact, one of the hallmarks of beauty, everyone agrees, is that the most symmetrical faces are the most beautiful in people, tend to be. So that too is very different. Now, another aspect of extreme difference between the Starchild and a human is the thickness of the bone, and we can see that very closely here. You see the difference. It's half or less. The Starchild's bone is half or less as thick. It weighs half as much. It's very much lighter in the hand than is a human skull.
So if it's not cradle boarding, could hydrocephaly have deformed the skull?
Anybody that says the Starchild is a hydrocephalic is missing a very important point. When you look at standard hydrocephalic pictures, you see it's blown up all around. There's no significant features like this. This grew this way because its genes told it to grow that way.
Having dismissed the opinion of traditional science, Lloyd undertook his own research. His findings are astonishing.
What makes the Starchild skull different is that there are 25 major physical differences between it and human skulls. There's not one part of it that's exactly like a human. It is completely different, and what that indicates is that its genes are radically different.
But does this mean the Starchild skull could only be of extraterrestrial origin? In 2003, DNA technology allowed Pi to put his theory to the test.
We got the first test by a laboratory that was capable of doing ancient DNA, and the answer that they got was that the mother was human and the father was not. Clearly something's wrong with the father. Father's not human.
Is the Starchild skull evidence that aliens bred with humans? Native American legends tell stories strikingly similar to Pi's theory.
There would be beings from the stars would come down from the skies, pick a woman in a village, and they would make her pregnant. So the Starchild fit right into that.
But as technology advances, so does the story of the Starchild skull. In early 2011, a new DNA test led Lloyd to an even more astonishing claim.
The conclusion that we've come to now after several DNA tests and an extensive analysis of those results is that the Starchild had an alien father and an alien mother. And when I say alien, I mean non-human. The difference is so stark, the difference is so wide, there is no way that we can call this a human.
Is this the first physical evidence that aliens exist? Lloyd has no doubt.
It's going to change human history to have to accept that at least once, 900 years ago, an alien being walked the earth, lived here, died here, and was buried here. This is the equivalent of landing on the moon.
What is the Starchild skull? For now it remains an enigma. Did it belong to a deformed child or an ancient adult with a disease of the brain? Is it conclusive evidence that we are not alone? Weird. Or what?
You know, I've always had a fascination with the relics of the ancient past. And I'm not just talking about the Beatles or the Rolling Stones or Leonard Nimoy. No. When it comes to our far distant history, there's nothing quite as spectacular, mysterious, and even frightening as dinosaurs. Surely the king of all creatures, real-life monsters that dominated the planet until something wiped them out, long before man even evolved. What a pity that we only find them now in museums or as cute toys. Can you imagine what it would be like to see one in the flesh? Well, maybe we already have. And maybe we still can. Weird. Or what?
Adventurer Dennis Swift travels the world in search of ancient artifacts, but nothing he's found compares to a discovery made in Ica, Peru, by a man named Javier Cabrera.
Dr. Cabrera made the greatest discovery in the history of mankind. The implications are staggering.
It began innocently enough at a birthday party in 1966.
It was Dr. Cabrera's 42nd birthday.
One of the doctor's oldest friends brings him a special gift.
Dr. Cabrera was given a stone. It was found in some official archaeological excavations.
The stone was carved by an ancient Peruvian tribe. His friend thinks it's a trinket, but the doctor makes a discovery that sets his heart racing. Etched into the stone is an image that defies explanation.
He recognized it to be a species of fish that went extinct 150 million years ago. Now, how do you explain that?
Seeking answers, the doctor employs local workmen to find more stones.
Dr. Cabrera began to find more in these stones, and people brought them to him. The more he delved into it, the more it consumed his life.
As more and more stones arrive, Dr. Cabrera realizes they feature other images that just shouldn't have been there.
Some of the stones seem to be depicting impossible scenes, things that would cause the textbooks to be rewritten.
What had the doctor found? It was something that would shock the world.
He risked his reputation. He said, if you look closely at this, you'll see a dinosaur carved there with two people.
It's an astonishing moment, but how could it be? Dinosaur fossils weren't identified until 1824. How could an ancient people have known about them 1,000 years ago?
Finding artifacts and information that showed that these people had knowledge of dinosaurs that predated our knowledge was truly amazing.
But could it be proved? After comparing the etchings on over 400 stones to real fossils, he discovered the depictions were accurate. The Peruvian artists must have known what dinosaurs looked like.
Now, not only is that astonishing, it began to say to him, they saw living, breathing dinosaurs. This is one of archaeological's most baffling enigmas.
Did the dinosaurs live millions of years longer than we thought they did?
I've studied the Ica Stones for well over 20 years. I believe they are very substantial, strong evidence that dinosaurs and man lived together.
Current scientific belief is that the dinosaurs were wiped out by an asteroid 66 million years ago. 59 million years before early man even existed. Swift, however, believes there's evidence to the contrary.
In the cultures around the world, they talk about encountering these animals of giant size, and they fit the description of what we would call a dinosaur. Of course, dinosaur was not coined until 1841 by Sir Edward Owen. It's a compound Greek word that means terrible lizard or frightfully fearful lizard. If you read the science books of the 1300s, 1400s, and 1500s, when they talk about dragons, they resemble very much what we would describe as a dinosaur. And in fact, there's an account of an Irishman in 900 AD who encountered a beast that had like triangular shaped, diamond shapes on its back. It had a head like a horse, and it had big iron spikes on the back of its tail. And it describes his legs. Well, What animal could that be? It could only be a stegosaurus. I've been with the American Indians, and they say, we don't like to tell white people because they make fun of us, but they believe that their ancestors fought against what we would call a triceratops.
Could some dinosaurs have survived extinction? Did they walk among ancient Peruvians? For Swift, the artifact's uncannily accurate proportions don't lie.
Here's a Styracosaurus on the stone. Does it have dermal spines? Yeah. Does the tail sticking out when it's walking? Yes. Does it have 3 toes? Yes. All right, so it's a dinosaur.
But if Swift is right, there's an even bigger question. If dinosaurs walked the Earth with humans only a relatively short time ago, then what happened to them? And where are they?
I believe that they existed from a few thousand years ago to maybe 500 years ago, and there's a possibility that there could be a handful left. There was a Frenchman in 1967, I believe, even took photographs of a footprint. It's 3-toed, it's huge, and it has a claw on the back. Only a dinosaur had that kind of a footprint. So, yeah, dinosaurs could be out there.
Oh, boy, this is incredible. I mean, that guy thinks that dinosaurs are still roaming the Earth. Wow. Let's think about what that means. There's not a lot of room left on the planet, so they're going to have to share our neighborhoods, right? Maybe we could have one as a pet. Can you imagine keeping one in your backyard? Ooh. I think not. Has somebody got a pooper scooper? A big one.
Did man and dinosaur coexist? Should we rip up our history books?
I think that people actually watch the Flintstones and think it's reality programming.
Ancient Peruvian stone carvings pose a shocking question. Did our ancient ancestors walk alongside dinosaurs? Archaeologist Ken Feder doesn't think so.
I think that people actually watch the Flintstones and think it's reality programming. It's not, it's a cartoon, folks. Fred did not have a pet dinosaur. That really didn't happen.
But how can Feder be sure humans never saw dinosaurs? He points to the tens of thousands of fossils collected worldwide, which confirm they died out 66 million years ago.
We have a whole lot of evidence that dinosaurs died off long before there were people. And the fact that we have a bunch of stones with carvings and people writing around on dinosaurs is not strong evidence at all.
But if ancient Peruvians didn't see dinosaurs, how do we explain the Ica Stones?
They're fakes, they're hoaxes. The story of the Ica Stones, from start to finish, mirrors the stories of lots of other archaeological hoaxes. They start small, but once it becomes clear that there's a guy willing to buy some stones, suddenly we have thousands of these things, and the actual stones themselves become more and more elaborate.
Rather than finding them in caves, could the Peruvian peasants simply have made the stones themselves? There's only one way to find out. Art student Justine McGrath has been asked to test Feder's theory that the stones are merely fakes. She's going to attempt to replicate the stones using basic tools.
So I begin by just copying out the image. It's a very simple line drawing.
The drawing complete, Justine begins carving. She uses a power tool for speed, though the etching could easily be done by hand. Although the pattern is complete, the stone doesn't have an ancient look. Justine has an inexpensive solution.
I'm going to cover the stone in a mixture of manure and olive oil.
It's a rather down-to-earth solution. Her method of baking the stones is equally low-tech. But could some manure, olive oil, and a barbecue really recreate the mysterious Ica Stones?
After just 3 hours of baking, this is what my Ica Stone looks like.
For Feder, the results of this experiment are decisive.
We have two possible explanations in science, one that requires overturning everything we know, and one that simply requires that people are trying to make a buck by hoaxing. So it's a lot easier for me to accept the possibility that people are making fakes than to completely rewrite everything we know about, again, geology, biology, and so on. This compressing, this sort of pushing all of human history into just a few thousand years is sort of absurd on its face. Again, when you have a convergence of evidence, convergence of data, archaeological evidence, separate. Geological evidence, separate. Biological evidence, separate. Paleontological evidence, separate. Historic evidence, separate. And when all that data converges and points in exactly the same direction, in ancient Earth, dinosaurs dying off tens of millions of years ago, first human ancestors 5, 6, 7 million years ago walking upright in the plains of Africa, all that evidence converges. It all is mutually supportive. This notion, there really isn't any place in that history for people riding their dinosaurs to the drive-in movie theater.
Is this the end of the mystery? Are the Ica Stones just fakes? Author Andy Lloyd is not so sure.
They weren't just created in someone's shed in the back garden 20 years ago. Some scientific work that's been done on them appears to indicate that there is a degree of oxidation over the engravings, which would indicate that they're of some antiquity.
So, if the stones really are ancient, that proves that the images they depict must have happened, right? Well, not necessarily.
I don't think that's very, very likely that man and dinosaur could have shared the Earth at any time. However, that's not to say that there isn't something rather wonderful about the Ica Stones in this regard. And one of the ideas that I've put forward is that the makers of the Ica Stones, the artists from ancient Peru who created them, may have received knowledge about dinosaurs from ancient civilizations whose own understanding of the dinosaurs was as good as ours.
Civilizations stretching back to ancient Greece unearthed dinosaur remains. They thought they were the bones of giants. But what if some ancient civilization did know what they were? Who could have done such a thing?
Atlantis is an excellent candidate because the discussions and descriptions of Atlantis show that it was a very technologically advanced civilization for its time.
The lost city of Atlantis, an advanced ancient civilization that is said to have flourished around the time of the Ice Age before falling into the ocean. Could Atlanteans have discovered dinosaurs?
We can speculate that the Atlanteans had a very good understanding of natural history because their ability with science and technology was evidently quite far advanced. They would have probably dug up dinosaur bones during their mining expeditions and pieced together a dinosaur in the same way that we did.
But many believe Atlantis to be little more than a legend, based on stories told by the Greek philosopher Plato. Is this strong enough evidence of its existence?
We can't authenticate the existence of Atlantis through anything other than Plato's writings, but some of his writings are some of the most important literature from that period. It seems odd that it's a story that Plato would have made up. This is the missing Atlantean link in our understanding of ancient civilizations and knowledge.
Could the Atlanteans have traveled the world, spreading a knowledge that was kept alive in stories and art? Or could the Ica Stones be definitive proof that our ancestors shared the Earth with dinosaurs? Or are they one of the most elaborate hoaxes of all time? Perhaps one day we'll know for sure, but in the meantime, it's most certainly weird. Or what? A 2,000-year-old wooden model excavated from Egypt's oldest pyramid reveals an amazing secret. Did the ancients invent modern flight?
It could have been launched easily from the top of a pyramid.
You know, I like to think of myself as a bit of an adventurer, or sort of an Indiana Jones, if you like. Bye. You see, I've been all over the world and collected some amazing relics. Wrong relic. Of course, some are more amazing than others. And some make you wonder what they might say if they could talk. Can you imagine finding something that could truly change the world? Well, here it is.
Sakara, Egypt. In one of the country's oldest burial grounds, French archaeologists begin to unearth the burial tomb of the 3rd century BC official, Paddy Iman. Among the artifacts recovered is what looks to be a model of a bird. It's cataloged and stored at the Cairo Museum for over 70 years. But no one could predict the shockwaves Special Register 6347 would soon make. The late Egyptologist Dr. Khalil Messiah realized the model was very unusual. It leads him to a breathtaking conclusion.
Dr. Messiah had found evidence of what appears to be a glider or an airplane, something that the ancient Egyptians supposedly didn't have.
Author David Childress thinks that Dr. Messiah has much to teach historians and the world.
To me, the research of Dr. Khalil Messiah is very important, because here we have a mainstream Egyptologist finding an artifact that we know is authentic, coming from over 2,000 years ago, a model, a very miniature model of an airplane, much like the early airplanes that were built in America and around the world at the turn of the century.
Could the artifact be a model of an ancient flying machine? It's a stunning revelation. Our histories tell us the first powered human flight was in 1903. If Dr. Messiah is correct, the ancient Egyptians may have beaten the Wright brothers by over 2,000 years. Although met with initial skepticism, tests by leading aeronautical engineers prove that the model, now known as the Sakara bird, was designed for flight.
Ancient cultures have many stories of flight, of vimanas, of magic carpets, of flying chariots. But here with the Sakara bird, we have an actual model of what could be an ancient airplane.
Did the ancient Egyptians experiment with flight? Is the artifact the model of a full-size glider or plane?
It's very important that we find artifacts like the Sakara bird and other strange artifacts from these ancient cultures, because it really helps us place their legends and myths in contexts, such as flight. Is it possible that they actually had flight like we do today? And I think they did.
Is the Sakara bird proof that the ancient Egyptians had technology 2,000 years ahead of its time? And if they did, how did they get it?
This is going to throw Egyptology and the way we view ancient civilizations completely topsy-turvy.
A man discovers a model wooden bird in a Cairo museum. Is the Sakara bird proof the Egyptians took to the skies 2,000 years ago? Katja Gobes is an Egyptologist. She has her doubts.
When I first heard that the Sakara bird was being used to support such claims of early aviation, I was completely taken aback. Certainly they were fascinated with the skies. They believed that their dead ascended to the sky to become celestial gods after death. Their chief deities were seen to be traveling through the sky, the sun god being the most important there, but there is no evidence whatsoever to suggest that the Egyptians had an interest in aviation.
But if the Sakara bird was not the model of a glider, what was it?
The symbol of a bird is extremely important within the Egyptian religious and political system. We find them used in the hieroglyphic writing system. We find them as images protecting the king.
One bird in particular, the falcon, had a role which explains why it would be placed in a tomb.
The deceased Egyptian wishes to ascend to the sky and sometimes says he does so on falcon's wings. In particular, the falcon with the outstretched wings you will find at the back of the king's head, indicating that he is afforded the protection of the gods, and he is in fact Horus on earth. We find amuletic representations of falcons as protective devices in funerary contexts. That means in Egyptian tombs, decorating the coffins of the dead, being placed as little protective objects, amulets, on the actual mummies, or painted on the coffins, painted on the sides of the on the walls of the tombs, and so forth.
There's one problem, though. The Sakara bird looks nothing like the other Egyptian falcons. So what can explain its flat tail and plane-like wing?
It is not unheard of that toys were given to deceased children, and they would be put into their tombs so they would be accessible for their afterlife and for their eternal pleasure.
Could the mysterious artifact be nothing more than a simple child's toy? Are the smooth body and flat tail the result of amateur craftsmanship and not deliberate design?
Even though there are a few idiosyncrasies in its representation, the Sakara bird is most likely an image of a falcon. There is no evidence that the Egyptians experimented with aviation technology. The claim is ludicrous, to say the least, so it is not inconceivable that the Sakara bird was a toy that was given to a child, or even to an adult who wanted to take his favorite childhood toy with him into the afterlife.
Are we reading too much into an ancient toy? Not everyone thinks so.
Artifacts like the Sakara bird are important because science likes to think it's got everything explained. We can explain how the Egyptians built the pyramids and all of their ancient technology, but items like the Sakara bird throw a monkey wrench into some of these old theories, because suddenly it's possible that the ancient Egyptians and other civilizations could do much like we did and have flight, have electricity, have machines. When we look at ancient civilizations like the ancient Egyptians, we see that they've made so many magnificent buildings, and their sciences were very exact. They were good engineers. They studied nature tremendously. So the Sakara bird seems to indicate that, yes, the ancient Egyptians knew about flight and had it.
But how can children be so sure that what looks like a bird is really a model airplane?
It's clearly an aerodynamic design and not just some simple toy. The wings are at what is known as the dihedral angle. It's a special angle that the wings of a glider have to be at in order to achieve lift. And the Sakara bird has that.
So the wings are airworthy, but what about the tail?
Dr. Masia had also found evidence that the very top part of the tail rudder had been broken off. And he theorized that it had, in fact, had also another vertical tail, much like a modern jet would have.
But if the Sakara bird was a model of an ancient glider, there's one big problem. Where in Egypt's flat desert could you glide from?
If it was a glider, it could have been launched easily from the top of a pyramid, perhaps, much like hang gliders themselves launch today off of cliffs and mountains. Or even, the Egyptians could have developed a relatively primitive catapult-type launching system that would have given this glider the power to get in the air and then fly over areas of Egypt. I believe that the ancient Egyptians and other civilizations had powered flight as well as gliders and airships and balloons, and even they had electricity and lights. Even they must have had power tools in some of their cases to build some of the buildings they had.
Were the crowning achievements of Egyptian civilization used as a launch pad by an ancient pair of Wright brothers?
If scientists are right that this is a model of a functioning glider, this is going to throw Egyptology and the way we view ancient civilizations completely topsy-turvy.
Okay, this is blowing my mind. Are they honestly trying to tell me that this 2,000-year-old ugly duckling is evidence of an ancient mastery of the laws of aerodynamics, that it could fly? Well, there's only one way to find out. Anybody got any clue?
A simple bird replica or evidence of early flight? What is the Sakara bird? Martin Gregory designs gliders. He thinks he knows the answer.
When I first heard the Sakara bird was the model for a full-size airplane, I was skeptical to say the least. I knew for a start that the ancient Egyptians didn't have anything that could be used as an engine to power an airplane, and that gives you the clue, because Egypt's pretty flat and you're going to need some way of getting the airplane into the air, and you also, if you're going to use it for carrying cargo, going to need something to power it so it can travel a useful distance. I decided the only way I could find out if the Sakara bird could have been a flying model was to build one myself.
Using the exact dimensions of the ancient artifact, Gregory constructs an identical replica. He'll launch it with a device used to test scale glider models.
I'm just about to launch the Sakara bird in its original form as it came out of the pyramid with no tailplane. That flight did what I expected it to do. Its lack of aerodynamics kicked in and it tumbled and fell to the ground.
The test is conclusive.
A model of that size needs a stabilizing tail.
Dr. Messia believed that the Sakara bird originally had a tail, which had snapped off with age. Could a tail make a difference?
Next, we're going to launch the Sakara bird again, but this time fitted with a tailplane. This will stabilize it and let us see how good or poor a glider it is.
2,000 years of history hang on this one test. It travels further, but not much. The end results are the same.
The wing has rounded edges, and that just doesn't generate very much lift at all. And in terms of stability, all modern airplanes have the wing bent up at the tips for stability instead of swooping down like this one does.
So does the experiment prove that the Sakara bird was really a child's toy? Following his experiment, Gregory has a theory of his own.
I think there's a possibility that it's a wind vane. I discounted the child's toy theory on the grounds that all real birds have a flat horizontal tail rather than a vertical fin, and most children will be able to recognize the difference and not be fooled by the presence of the fin. To find out whether it could have been a wind vane, I put a pivot on the belly of it, and as you can see, I think it's a far better weather vane than it is a flying model.
So, is the answer to a 2,000-year-old mystery really blowing in the wind? Was the Sakara bird simply an ancient plaything? Or could it be evidence of mankind's first attempt at flight? We may never know. Weird or what? So there we have it. 3 ancient artifacts that bring into question everything we understand about history. A bizarrely shaped skull is found in a Mexican cave. Is it proof that aliens once visited Earth? Scenes depicted on ancient stone carvings question our natural history. Did man and dinosaur share our planet? And a 2,000-year-old wooden model suggests the impossible. Did an ancient civilization fly? You decide.
Join me again next time for more stories that will undoubtedly be weird or what? You know, I've been around for a while, met some interesting people, done some crazy things. So you just might think that there's not much that can take me by surprise. You'd be wrong. The world is full of stories, science and things that amaze and confound me. Every single day, incredible mysteries that keep me awake at night. Some I can answer. Others just defy logic.
Does the human body contain inexplicable mysteries beyond the reach of medical science? In Arkansas, a skydiver plummets to the earth from over 11,000 feet and somehow survives. How? In New York, a man is vaporized as he lies in bed. Can humans spontaneously combust?
I've been to fires before too, and nothing like that.
And in England, a young girl becomes supercharged with electricity. Is she a walking power grid?
She wouldn't touch me if she was switching the light switch on because a jolt of electricity would go through her.
Yeah. It's a weird world, and I love it. The human body. Remarkable, isn't it? Well, this one is anyway. Just a candid shot of me at the beach. But this is what we all look like underneath. Unless you believe in reincarnation, we only get one of these. But do we really appreciate just how incredible these things that carry us around are, or do we take them for granted? You see, many believe we're much more than just skin and bones. That there's things going on inside us that modern medicine may never be able to explain. Is it true? Do you think they can help me with my indigestion?
October 9th, 2005. Siloam Springs, Arkansas.
Hi, what's your name?
You know my name.
Adrenaline junkie Shayna Richardson, 21, is about to attempt her first solo skydive.
All right, Shayna.
Shayna's husband, Rick West, was also her jump instructor.
I was very confident that, that she was well prepared for this.
Rick has a helmet camera
Hi, Shayna.
to capture Shayna's jump. Together, they will free fall from an altitude of 11,000 feet. more than 2 miles high. At first, things go great.
We exited the plane well, and she did a perfect dive.
Rick and Shayna are plummeting to Earth at terminal velocity, 120 miles per hour. After 30 seconds of freefall, Shayna pulls the ripcord.
And as you see in the video, I say,
Woo! Good job, Shayna. Yeah, girl.
And I had no idea at this time that she was in any kind of trouble until I look up.
What Rick sees fills him with horror. On her very first jump, his wife's main parachute has failed. Desperate, Shayna releases it and tries her reserve.
And then her reserve didn't work out so well.
Unable to help, Rick realizes he is watching what will be his wife's final moments.
Shayna is spinning out of control.
8,000 feet from the ground, Shayna's reserve parachute is tangled. She is now plummeting uncontrollably towards the ground at over 70 feet per second.
Panic sets in. She kept spinning and kept spinning and spinning. And the closer and closer we get, I'm seeing cars, semis, the road, buildings she was heading right into.
Helpless, Rick can only watch as Shayna spins towards certain death.
It was horrible for me. It was just a sickening feeling.
To Rick's horror, Shayna slams directly into a parking lot.
I was sure she was dead or gonna be dead really quick. And as soon as I landed, I turned the camera off, and I was just trying to get to her in time to tell her that I love her and I'm sorry. She was actually laying in a pool of blood. Her bottom lip had been busted, peeled out, split above her nose, was wide open. You could almost see the bone.
But something miraculous has happened.
I really did firmly believe that I was going to die.
Despite smashing into asphalt from a height of 2 miles, Shayna is somehow alive.
My face hit a split second before the rest of my body did. The doctors described my facial fractures as kind of an eggshell effect. I broke pretty much every bone in my face, my ocular sockets, my sinus cavity. I knocked out the front 5 teeth in my mouth, so they had to completely rebuild my face. I broke my pelvis in 3 places. I broke my right leg.
Shayna's doctors can't comprehend how she survived her fall, but then their jaws drop even lower. Shayna's not the only survivor.
The very first thing I remember hearing from the doctors was about the baby.
Unknown to both Shayna and Rick, she's pregnant. Miraculously, both mother and baby survive. Their son, Tanner, is now 5. Somehow, this remarkable story has a happy ending, but the doctors are still trying to figure it out.
The doctors in that hospital just said, this is amazing. This is a miracle. I don't understand.
So how are Shayna and her unborn child able to survive such an unbelievable fall? What had happened that saved their lives? Dr. Chris Hart is an expert in aviation accident investigation. He's extensively studied Shayna's accident and has reached a controversial conclusion.
I think the way she hit the ground is critically important for why she survived.
It's believed that Shayna face-planted into the ground. But Hart disagrees.
Looking at the video, I don't believe she hit the ground face first. Clearly, she's at about a 45 to 60 degree angle. So when she finally makes contact with the ground, she contacts feet first, then legs, then side, and then finally head. The injuries to her pelvis and to her legs are very common when someone lands feet first. If it's a head first injury, you typically don't see those types of injuries.
Hart believes that the angle of Shayna's fall was critical to her survival, as it enabled her to inadvertently perform a skydiving safety technique.
I think just the laws of physics dictated that the way her body hit was very similar to a parachute landing fall. The parachute landing fall is a technique for improving the odds of surviving a hard landing without injury. The technique is essentially to distribute the force of impact over 5 body points. You start with contacting on the balls of the feet, and then the calves, then the thighs, then the hips, and then the side of the back. You can think of the parachute landing fall as almost being like a bumper on a car. The head is what you want to protect. The body acts as the shock absorber.
But what about the damage to Shayna's face? How could a successful parachute landing fall have resulted in such horrific injuries?
Even though she didn't hit face first, her body was traveling at a very high rate of speed. She sustained injuries to every part of her body that hit the ground. Her face was probably the last thing that hit the ground, but it was still moving fast enough to cause some pretty serious injuries. Given her lack of training, it's very fortunate that Shayna executed what was very similar to a parachute landing fall. Had she not done that, she almost certainly would have perished. She should consider herself very fortunate.
Did the accidental execution of the parachute landing fall save Shayna's life? Or is the explanation beyond the understanding of science?
She was exempt from the laws of gravity.
21-year-old Shayna Richardson experiences every skydiver's nightmare. When her parachutes fail, she slams into the ground from 11,000 feet. But amazingly, Shayna survives. How? Sophie Burnham is an author. She believes Shayna's survival was, quite literally, a miracle.
To me, her survival is incomprehensible, except by divine intervention. It had to be the hand of an angel. She was exempt from the laws of gravity.
We've all heard of angels, but let's just make sure we're on the same page as Sophie.
Angels are messengers of the divine, and they can come in any form. They come to the innocent, to people whose work is not yet finished on this plane of existence. Angels save people from possible death in any way that it can be done. Sometimes it's by deflecting a bullet, and sometimes it's by preventing a car accident. They can change all the physical laws of the universe.
No doubt they do good work, but how exactly did an angel save Shayna?
It is not difficult for me to believe that an angel carried Shayna down or broke her fall so that she would not fall as swiftly as she should have.
It's an interesting theory, but is it supported by scientific proof?
Lots of times, miracles occur with scientific explanations and are just as miraculous. I don't think that science and miracles are mutually exclusive. And I think that there is a spiritual dimension that we live in as fish live in water. I am sure that some people completely dismiss the idea that an angel could save Shayna's life. And I think it's very important for some people to believe that they are in control. We don't want to be so completely at the mercy of fate and fortune that there's nothing that we can do. I would not try to dissuade somebody from that position if it's important to him. But to me, I would need very, very strong proof of something that happened. Like she pulled a third parachute out and came down. I would need very strong scientific proof. I can't imagine what would have happened if an angel had not saved Shayna that day. There would have been her body splattered over the parking lot in a gory, bloody, disgusting, horrible, horrible accident. It would have been ghastly.
Wow, this is incredible.
Instead of being splattered all over the parking lot, Sophie thinks an angel swooped down at the last moment, somehow taking hold of Shayna, breaking her fall. Could this really be possible? Regardless of your beliefs, one has to admit that Shayna's story is, well, miraculous. But could a guardian angel have slowed Shayna's fall, sparing her life, the life of her unborn son? And if so, don't they deserve some thanks?
There is no evidence that guardian angels exist. There is no empirical evidence for it. Okay, it's just people trying to put meaning onto things they don't understand. You know, this is the 21st century, for goodness sake. We need to move on.
John Leach is a survival psychologist with the Norwegian Armed Forces. He believes the key to Shayna's survival lies in a theory that's far more down to earth.
If a person is falling without a parachute, after about 12 seconds, they'll reach the maximum rate of descent. And it doesn't matter how long they're falling for, they will stay at 120 miles an hour. If Shayna had hit the ground at normal terminal velocity of 120 miles an hour, she would have had a very small chance of surviving that, especially on the sort of ground that she hit. Now, there are cases of people who have survived from terminal velocity, but usually it's because they've gone into soft ground, they've gone into mud, they've gone into snow, they've gone into trees. So there's something that's actually decelerated their speed at the last minute.
But if her chances of surviving were so low, how is it that Shayna and Tanner are still with us?
You can see from the video that although the parachute was malfunctioning, it wasn't completely dysfunctional. In other words, it was still acting as a sort of parachute and providing a degree of drag. So instead of hitting the ground at 120 miles an hour, which is a terminal velocity for somebody traveling without a parachute, she hit the ground at 50 miles an hour according to the records.
Was Shayna's survival connected to how fast she hit the ground? Or did something else save her?
Age plays a role in survival for various reasons, and a number of studies involving analysis of, for example, road traffic accidents at different speeds shows that one of the best ages for surviving an impact at 50 miles an hour is Shayna's age, so somewhere between the late teens and early 20s.
For Leach, the final factor in Shayna's survival is the angle of impact, though with a very different take to Dr. Chris Hart.
I don't think we should be deploying any parachute landing technique. The parachute was moving her into a more horizontal position, and the injuries that she sustained is consistent with that type of impact on the ground. And the fact that she hit the ground more or less horizontally rather than on her head or through her feet also increased her chances of survival.
For Leach, the combination of a partially effective parachute, Shayna's age, and landing almost flat to the ground is enough to leave her battered, but still breathing.
All these factors together all contribute to her chances of surviving. So there's nothing miraculous about it, it's straightforward physics.
I did jump one more time. When Tanner was 6 weeks old, I went and jumped again. I did a tandem jump. I landed, took my gear off, grabbed my son, and I haven't been back up. I love the sport, I love the thrill of it, but my kids give me a much greater thrill, and I don't have it in me anymore. I can't do it.
Can Shayna's remarkable survival be explained by physics? Or did divine intervention play a part? Was she saved by a higher power? Or did she just get lucky and deploy the parachute landing fall? For now, it will remain a head-scratcher that's most definitely weird. Or what? In upstate New York, a man is incinerated in his own bed. With no plausible explanation, investigators are left with a terrifying question. Can we spontaneously combust?
When someone is cremated, there's probably more remains after that cremation than there was at this incident.
You know, fire is a wonderful thing. We've harnessed its power in so many ways we'd be lost without it. It does everything from keeping us warm to one of my favorites, cooking up a storm. Well, Well, that's, if you can get it started, of course. The thing about fire is that, as well as being our friend, it can be our worst enemy. Does anyone smell anything that,
In 1986, college student Ray Harlan was visiting his father, Jack, a coroner in New York State, when the phone rang. It would lead them on the most mysterious and bizarre journey of their lives.
My dad owns a local funeral home, and he was also the county coroner. They just said that there was an unattended death, and one of us always went with them to help them with removals.
The deceased is a 58-year-old retired fireman, George Mott. When Ray and Jack arrive at Mott's house, everything seems normal.
It was just a typical home in the back roads of the Adirondacks.
But nothing has prepared the Harlans for what they find inside.
The first words out of the state trooper's mouth to my dad was, I don't think you're going to need your stretcher for this one.
Entering the house, Ray and Jack notice something that tells them this is no ordinary death.
There was a thin black film covering everything. It was like a dust powder. It was strange because it looked like there was a fire, but there was nothing really charred.
Where's George Mott? As they move deeper into the house, they're about to make a shocking discovery.
When we walked into the bedroom, you could see where Mr. Mott was laying. In my lifetime growing up in the funeral home, I've probably seen over 1,000 bodies in various conditions. And I've been to fires before too, and there never nothing like that. There was a perfect outline of his body burned into the mattress. And the only thing that was left of him was his head, a few ribs, and his right foot. Everything else was gone.
What happened to George Mott? The charred remains suggest he died in a fire, but this was no ordinary blaze.
Usually in a fire, instead the whole body remains, you never see parts of the body missing. To put it in perspective, when someone is cremated for 5 to 6, sometimes 7 hours, there's probably more remains after that cremation than there was at this incident.
It's a baffling and gruesome mystery. George Mott has been incinerated to a fine powder, but somehow the objects around him are not even singed, including a canister of matches only inches away. But how? Remarkably, all over Mott's house, there is evidence that this was a fire unlike any other.
Everything plastic was melted. The casing on the TV was distorted, and the telephone was melted to a ball plastic.
It's an incredible puzzle. What sort of heat or fire could vaporize a man and melt plastic but not burn the house down?
The fireman thought it was a gas leak underneath his bed, but if it was a gas leak and it was fire, there would have been a lot more burning. They'd never found a gas leak.
It's left to Ray to offer a theory.
I mentioned human spontaneous combustion, and everybody looked at me like I was crazy.
Spontaneous human combustion, or SHC, is a bizarre and weird phenomenon in which a person instantly bursts into flames for no apparent reason. Amazingly, there have been 40 other cases of SHC documented in the last century.
To that point, I don't think anybody in that room has heard of it. And everybody almost had the same reaction. Spontaneous combustion, what is that?
The investigation into George Mott's death failed to reach a conclusion, but Ray Harlan has no doubt what happened.
I still believe that it was spontaneous combustion because there's no other explanation. This is what I saw.
Now, this is weird or what? I mean, we know heavy metal rock drummers spontaneously combust all the time, but an innocent, harmless man minding his own business in bed and then poof, he goes up in smoke. I mean, what's going on here? Are any of us safe? Oh no, not again!
Was George Mott a victim of SHC? Can a human simply ignite and burn without any external cause?
Spontaneous human combustion is amazing, bizarre, horrific. Given all that, it still happens.
A man is incinerated by a bizarre, inexplicable fire. Is his death proof that people can just spontaneously catch fire?
We have spent more than 3 decades looking at this incredibly weird phenomenon, and our conclusion is absolutely categorically, yes, it does happen.
Larry Arnold is a writer. He's dedicated himself to the study of SHC. He came to the scene of the George Mott conflagration.
To be at the scene of one of these remarkably rare and phenomenal events is eerie. It's unearthly. We look at the person who used to be there, and we're looking at something burned more completely than after several hours at several thousand degrees Fahrenheit. The George Mott fire scene is incredibly complex and very puzzling, even to someone such as ourselves who has looked at scores of cases that seem to emulate the kind of fire that consumed Mr. Mott. Something burned up Mr. Mott more completely than can be accomplished in a crematorium. His body burned through his bed, actually pushed the mattress springs into a V, burned through the boarding underneath the mattress, burned through the floorboards, and into a crawl space below. There is no heat or flame damage directly above the point of combustion that consumed Mr. Mott. We could touch the ceiling. It was about 7.5 feet high. Not a scorch mark of any kind on the ceiling directly above the point of combustion. In most fires, heat rises. We would expect to see a lot of heat and flame damage above the bed. Zero. Throughout the house, there was a nonsensical pattern of melted plastics or not melted plastics. It's baffling to us to this day, and we spent a lot of hours, as did the county officials, investigating this fire scene.
But if Mott self-immolated, how did it happen? Arnold believes the answer can be found in something so tiny we can't even see it.
We wondered how much energy it takes to cremate someone like George Mott in the natural conditions, and if there could be a particle that would have that amount of energy contained within it. So we pulled up a theory from quantum physics, crunched the numbers. You come up with a particle that is incredibly small, much smaller than an atom, but it has an energy level which is humongous.
Arnold calls these subatomic particles pyrotrons. He believes they may be tiny, but they pack a punch.
It's so small that it can pass through three-dimensional matter almost unimpeded, perhaps through galaxies without ever striking something.
But according to Arnold, when the pyrotron does connect with something physical, the results are catastrophic.
On rare occasion, luck runs out, happenstance happens, and in those conditions, when the pyrotron, with its incredibly high energy, impacts something inside a human being, we posit the end result is spontaneous human combustion. In essence, a human Hiroshima effect, a thermonuclear explosion, if you will, in the body.
Is spontaneous human combustion the result of a pyrotron colliding with a particle inside the human body? Did George Mott die from a freak collision of physics?
There simply is no plausible way by any chemical mechanism known that the body could just suddenly burst into flames and proceed to be destroyed.
Joe Nickel is an investigator of the paranormal and a firm believer that spontaneous human combustion is a myth with a rational explanation.
I looked at 30 historical cases from the 18th century throughout the 20th century. And in every case, I could find a plausible source for the ignition. For example, the famous case in America of Mary Reeser in 1951 in St. Petersburg, Florida. She burned up in a very unusual way, sort of one of the classic cases. But when she was last seen, and this is left out of some of the stories, she was wearing flammable night clothes, sitting in a big stuffed chair, smoking a cigarette, having taken 2 Seconal sleeping tablets. and planned to take 2 more sleeping tablets before going to bed because she was having trouble sleeping. Now, it's kind of a no-brainer to suggest that she caught on fire by dozing off and dropping her cigarette. Yes, there are other mysteries. Why did her body burn so thoroughly, and why were nearby objects? We take those one at a time. And in these cases, you can't just have a sort of simple-minded, one-size-fits-all explanation and say, oh yeah, that's just this. No, you have to actually look at the facts in a particular case and look at the physics, because there are no two quite alike. The most logical explanation for the George Mott fire was a canister of matches sitting on, of all places, his oxygen enricher unit. He had either been somewhere to light a stove or something, and a spark could have gotten onto his clothes.
But how could a spark or a cigarette burn a human body to the extent seen in SHC cases?
In the forensic literature is something known as the wick effect. And that is, if you think of a wick in a candle, the wick is not doing much burning. The wick is simply a conduit. Now, if you think of the human body as sort of a candle inside out, the body has a lot of fat. It's very flammable.
Sounds horrific. How can someone become a human candle?
The clothing acts as a kind of wick in which once the body begins to burn, that body fat can be absorbed by clothing, mattress, and that begins this cyclical process in which the body burns, releasing more body fat to destroy still more of the body to release more. It's the wick effect that's helping this burn in a very efficient way. There's never a big fire when the body burns in this way. It's not a huge inferno. The results afterwards may look like that's what happened, but what actually happened is just that the body burned very slowly and very efficiently where the body fat was, in the torso, the upper thighs. You'll often find limbs or body parts that are not burned for pretty obvious reasons. They don't have as much body fat. Even a lean person has a significant amount of body fat. So while this isn't an explanation for all burning deaths, it's a relevant factor in some of the unusual cases because it can explain why, over a period of several hours, a fire is progressing and attacking and burning a body which is actually supplying the fuel for its own destruction.
But if your clothes catch fire, you simply put them out, right?
In some cases, the person may have had a seizure or a heart attack. In other cases, they may have been lying asleep and smoldering material near them first started burning, creating a lot of smoke. They may have died of smoke inhalation and never woken up.
Nickel believes that his theory can explain the almost complete lack of fire damage around the body.
Since there's never a big fire here, nearby objects are not going to be burned. Just as you can sit just inches away from a campfire and toast a marshmallow and not be burned, the same is true with this wick effect.
But does this explain the other objects that were melted throughout George's house?
The heat, of course, is gathering and rising. Objects above a certain line will be melted because the heat is accumulated there. And in the Mott case, there was soot all over. There's usually a sooty deposit if there's a lot of organic material being burned.
For Nickel, the answer is clear.
If science knows anything about spontaneous human combustion, it is that it doesn't exist. It's difficult to prove a negative, but we don't have to. There just is no evidence. To say it's unlikely does not do justice to how very, very, very far-fetched this idea is. The George Mott case was a mystery. I would consider it basically a mystery solved.
Does Nickel's theory prove that SHC does not exist? Can these horrific deaths be explained by the wick effect?
We've tried to conduct those experiments ourselves. We know others in the forensics field who have done so. They can't replicate these fire scenes under controlled scientific conditions. It doesn't work for us, and it did not work for the local investigators in Essex County. This is an example of individuals making up facts, creating stories, generating hypotheses without foundation to explain away something that they don't otherwise want to confront. Spontaneous human combustion is amazing, bizarre, horrific. Given all that, it still happens.
So is spontaneous human combustion real? It's a debate that will continue to rage. One thing we do know for certain, though, it's definitely weird. Or what? A British woman reports an ability that defies science. Can she harness electrical power?
The possibilities of things going wrong are just mind-blowingly frightening.
You know, when it comes to medicine, there's very little modern science can't explain. Oh my God! What is that disgusting thing in there? Oh. Sometimes we come across things that are not only inexplicable, they send a shiver down your spine. Or in the case of our next story, 1,000,000 volts through your hand. Whoa! Weird? Oh! Or what?
Growing up in London, England, Debbie Wolfe thought she was a normal child.
I think when you're a small child, you don't realise you're different from anyone else. But my mum got it pretty quickly, I think.
Shortly after Debbie turned 4, her mother noticed there was something rather unusual about her daughter.
My mum noticed like hot spots of problems. It was just the era of everyone had Walkmans, and I drained the batteries, and light bulbs seemed to be quite vulnerable. My mum wouldn't touch me if she was switching the light switch on because a jolt of electricity would go through her.
Incredibly, it seems this tiny girl had somehow become supercharged with electricity. But what could cause this weird phenomenon? For Debbie and her family, it's just the start of a bizarre and literally shocking ordeal.
Every time I walked past the telly, the channels would start changing. The volume would go up or down, or it would switch off. I was always excluded from the lounge when the football was on because my dad didn't want me changing the channels.
Incredibly, when Debbie interacts with anything electrical, havoc ensues. She fries appliances, drains batteries, and explodes light bulbs. And as she gets older, the condition gets worse.
There's one particular occasion that I remember. I can't have been more than about 6. We went to this shop, one of my mum's favourite shops, and as we went past each street light, it went off and on and off and on as we passed them.
Remarkably, Debbie's electrical power grows with every step. By the time they arrive at the shop, things are getting out of control.
They had these metal rails where the clothes were displayed, and for some reason that seemed to spark me. So much so that I could touch it and you'd see sparks and you'd hear the crack of the spark. So my mum tried to herd me away from that.
But her mum doesn't act fast enough. Debbie's touch electrifies the entire store, blowing the fuses and plunging it into complete darkness. Terrified of her young child's weird power, Debbie's mum rushes her from the shop.
My mum made rules about what I was allowed to do and not allowed to do because it was disruptive.
What happened to Debbie Wolfe? Could she be cured by medicine? Or did she need an electrician? Sadly, her condition hasn't gone away. Over 3 decades later, she is still suffering.
I affected everything. I lost a job in a nightclub because every time I walked past the DJ box, the music would go off. My house is just like a graveyard of electrical goods. And I've usually got a TV or something sitting in my drive waiting to be taken to the dump. I get through an extraordinary amount of kettles and toasters and TVs. So I tend to buy second-hand TVs. And it is expensive and inconvenient, and I'm not always welcome in people's houses. I don't know from day to day what's going to work and what isn't, which is quite annoying when the fridge is defrosting in the morning. So basically, my house is just, you know, on a short lifespan. The thing I hate most to do, but I have to do it anyway, is flying. I just hate flying. The fear of being able to stop a plane in midair and having it drop out of the sky. No, because the possibilities of things going wrong are just mind-blowingly frightening.
Is Debbie somehow generating lethal amounts of electricity? If so, how and why? Incredibly, she isn't the only one suffering from this bizarre affliction. Thousands of others have it too, and it's even been given a name. Street light interference syndrome. Those who have it are called sliders. What are sliders and where do they get their supercharged powers? Are they a threat to themselves or even us? Bill Beatty is an electrical engineer. He thinks he can explain sliders.
I first heard about this in the 80s, and I started wondering, are they some kind of electric generator?
Could sliders like Debbie actually be generating their own electricity? How could she do it? Beatty thinks her power could be an extension of something we've all experienced.
If you scuff on the rug and touch a doorknob and you hear that little click, that's static electricity. The effect is caused by your body being charged.
Rubbing your feet steals negatively charged electrons from the carpet. With each step, you steal more electrons and develop more of a negative charge. Something easily detected with a voltmeter.
If I scuff on the rug, watch what happens. I'm scuffing my shoe. Oh, and they're all turning on and off. This is me moving my shoe up and down on the carpet. There's some more over there. So a science fair project for kids, a little transistor voltage detector. So if you were an electric human, you wouldn't have to scuff on the carpet. So if I could stand perfectly still and wait for long enough for my charge to go away, oh, it's gone again. So it already leaked away here. I would be turning the light on and off if my body charged up by itself. So I'm not an electric human, oh well.
But could this build up enough charge to affect a street light? Beatty believes sliders could generate large amounts of static electricity in another way.
Well, there's one thing that humans do which might explain this, and that's breathing.
Every day, humans take over 25,000 breaths. Remarkably, Beatty thinks it's possible we can steal a few electrons from the air each time we breathe in, and eventually supercharge our bodies.
If you can charge your body up by breathing, you have this invisible field of voltage around your body that can affect electronic devices, even from a few feet away.
But if everyone breathes air, why would only a few people, like Debbie, turn into human lightning bugs?
There's a chance that it could be a virus that hasn't been discovered yet. There are a few viruses that they're not like the flu or colds. Instead, when you catch it, there's almost no change, and then your body easily fights it off. If it's communicable, then you'd think that there'd be lots of electric humans, or you'd get it for a while and then it would be gone again. But this sounds more like it might be something that's like a symbiotic thing, that maybe you're born with it and you can't give it to other people.
Could some yet-to-be-discovered virus alter the lungs of sliders just enough to strip electrons from the air and turn them into supercharged humans? Or is Beatty's theory a few connections short of a circuit?
Oh, I was attracted to it because it's weird, but the vast, unstudied collection of weird things, some of those are real, and those are Nobel Prize discoveries.
So let me get this right. Sliders have an innate ability to wreak havoc on electrical goods, especially streetlights, right? And one guy thinks the reason they can do this is there's a virus going around that can supercharge your body as you breathe. Can't we come up with a better explanation? I mean, when it comes to electrical faults, isn't it just a matter of some dummy doing something stupid?
So do sliders really have the power to generate electricity?
The phenomenon, to me, is not a real phenomenon at all.
Around the world, hundreds of people known as sliders claim to have the ability to interfere with electricity. Do they have a science-baffling superpower? Lee Colville has studied sliders for 5 years. He thinks he's found another way to explain the phenomenon.
It's highly improbable that anyone can generate enough electricity to affect a street lamp. We're talking about millions of volts here, as with a lightning bolt, and obviously a very high current flow. I mean, basically, if anyone could generate that amount of electricity, I mean, they would kill them. You know, the current flow itself would kill them and probably fry them, and they'd be blowing cars up and all sorts all over the place. You know, you don't see that, so therefore it's very unlikely. The most plausible explanation to me is basically pure coincidence.
But how could pure chance explain the incredible effect sliders have over electrical devices like street lamps?
Most people are not aware of how the streetlight works or what happens when the streetlight malfunctions. Here we have a common example of a street lamp, which is a high-pressure sodium lamp.
Many streetlights use powerful sodium light bulbs. When they get old, they don't just burn out or even flicker like fluorescent bulbs. Instead, they begin a process called cycling.
It will turn off. When it cools down, it will basically come on again. Obviously, it will get too hot, then it will cool down again, come back on again, cycling on and off periodically.
If someone walked under a cycling street lamp at just the right moment, they could think they turned it on. But what about Debbie Wolf? She made a whole street go haywire.
A row of lamps that's probably installed at the same time, so the chances are that if one is faulty, you're going to find another one that's faulty along the same row.
Do faulty streetlights explain this mystery? What about all the other electrical gadgets that sliders like Deborah destroy?
Static electricity, it's mundane as that. If you've got someone with very dry skin, you could build up quite a large voltage, and by touching any electrical appliance, it could discharge and cause damage to sensitive components.
Are sliders just mistaking static electricity and coincidence for superpowers?
There's no reason to be frightened of spending time around a ledge slider, because the phenomenon, to me, is not a real phenomenon at all.
So, is this the end of the mystery? Maybe not. Suan Jaising is a mechanical engineer who was intrigued by Debbie's story.
A person being able to produce energy or harness energy is much like the X-Men, so it kind of provoked my interest.
He's come up with a remarkable new theory to explain what is happening.
I'm a bit skeptical that the body alone can generate enough energy to knock off electrical streetlights. But Debbie's body could absorb energy from around us and release it in the form of an electrical pulse.
Instead of creating electrical energy, could Debbie actually be sucking it up from the world around her?
Electricity plays quite an important role in our human body. Theoretically, one could possess the ability to store electricity through their bodies, just like a capacitor.
Capacitors are common in all electronics. They are used to gradually soak up excess electricity and then discharge it in a flash. Could Debbie be a human capacitor?
Her body may possess molecules that are able to harness this power.
To prove his theory, Jaising has conducted tests designed to try and stimulate Debbie into releasing an electrical charge. Using an oscilloscope, an instrument which measures voltage, he compares her output to someone with a normal charge.
And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you some images, see whether we are able to simulate some electricity. Okay?
Debbie seems to become most electric when she's excited or stressed. Jaising uses images he hopes will recreate those feelings. Although not conclusive, some of Jasing's experiments have produced surprising results.
With Debbie, we noticed that there was a voltage that was being measured from her body that was different to what could be measured from ours. So the slider phenomenon does exist.
But this phenomenon isn't something Debbie can turn on and off at will.
It's very hard to bring myself to a place where I'm going to be electric, I suppose. I mean, I'd be a much richer person if I could do circus tricks, and I can't. It just happens.
Are Debbie and thousands like her really able to store electricity and release it in a flash? Could a rare virus have turned them into human generators? Or could it all be just a series of shocking coincidences? Whatever the answer, it's most definitely weird. Or what? So there we have it. 3 bizarre medical mysteries. An Arkansas woman baffles medical professionals by surviving a horrific skydiving accident. In upstate New York, a man vaporized in a fire leaves investigators asking, can humans spontaneously combust? And a group of people report being able to interfere with electricity. Do they have an inexplicable superpower? You decide.
Join me again next time for more stories that will undoubtedly be weird or